Hello, good morning. Welcome to this session of the AJ 100 Festival. This morning we've got a speaker from Jestico Whiles, Alex Lowy, who's going to give us a talk about urban density. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute or two. Then I'm going to give a brief presentation on zinc used on residential projects in the UK and around the world. And after that, there's going to be a Q&A session. So when you've got questions, put them into the chat box and we'll try and get through as many as possible. We're probably just going to give a few seconds for people to join because it's still, well, it's not exactly early in the morning, but it's still the morning. But before Alex starts his talk, I'm just going to give you a few little things about it. So Alex Lowy from Jestico Whiles is going to be talking about the current trends in architectural design with specific regard to urban density, which is obviously a topic that's been discussed a lot in recent weeks and months.
Topic. I'll try and keep it
it's a big topic indeed. And it's going to include some internal research that Jestico and Whiles have done, which I think is going to be very interesting to hear. So just before Alex starts, I think we're just going to wait literally probably about another 20 or 30 seconds. I do see there's lots of people joining in, but to give everybody a chance to hear Alex's presentation from the beginning, let's just give everybody about another 20 seconds. So we'll get started very shortly.
Shall I share my screen in that time?
Yeah, go ahead, share your screen. Yeah, that's probably good.
Okay. And everyone can see that.
I think I can certainly see that, so I think that's going to be visible to everybody. Right. Well, I think lots of people have joined in, so it's about 33 minutes past. So I think Alex, take it away, and I'll put myself on mute.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi everyone. Welcome. I'm Alex Lowy from Jestico Whiles Architects. Thank you for that introduction, Jonathan. Thank you to the AJ for having us in to speak to you this morning. So firstly, an apology to anyone who might have logged in and was hoping to see some of this. Unfortunately, this isn't the reunion concert you might have been hoping for. Hopefully you don't feel too misled. But for those of you who are keen on finding Easter eggs on your multiple, presumably re-watchings of this talk, I have sprinkled some small references for you throughout. So see if you can pick them up. There are no prizes, unfortunately. So once again, I'll recap. I'll say my name again, and I'm Alex Lowy from Jestico and Whiles Architects. We are a multidisciplinary practice. We work across a wide variety and range of sectors. We have offices in London and in Prague. And my own specialism that I've developed over the years working here is in housing and residential architecture, which is always a hot topic, never more so than now, given that we have all probably spent the last 6 months in our homes. So I wanted to talk to you this morning about density in design, a couple of factors surrounding it, and starting a little bit about the ecosystem and the trends before coming to some analysis and internal research that we've done. And finally, a real world example of our work in this field. So housing. I think we all know in the industry the direction that we're moving towards in terms of town planning, in design. We've got a world of mixed use, fuzzy typologies, got emerging models like build to rent, pocket living, or even the rediscovery of older models like co-living or the welcome re-emergence of intergenerational housing. Housing that we build, though, is very rarely just housing anymore. So taking some of Jestico Whiles' example projects over the past 5 years, we've got housing in a theatre in Peckham, or this is housing and a market, housing and a nursery, housing and a brewery, housing with warehouses, housing which looks like warehouses but actually has, you know, another theatre and co-working space and market space and all that stuff inside it. This is a project, unfortunately it's pixelated because I can't reveal it to you yet. We haven't gone into planning, but this is a hotel, it's a market hall, it's a cultural event space, it's co-working, it's spa, it's retail, it's got 3 restaurants in and a sky bar, but it is housing. So in all of these different incarnations, the one thing that we are seeing, and we're always building housing with, ever more so, is density. And there's a good reason why density is the word on everyone's lips, why there are so many talks about it, why it's the subject of this talk, and that's density is something we need to be building more of. It's just inescapable. Why is that? Well, high level, the answer is both, of course, very complicated, but ultimately very simple. We have, on one hand, an entirely unregulated global market. It's predicated on perpetual infinite growth, and that's called people keep on making more people. So in the United Kingdom, this is a graph of the UK population. It's currently growing at a steady rate of 1 million more people every 3 years through population growth and immigration and so on. Studies do suggest that eventually this will level off in the future, but for the time being, we are very much at this point of the graph. So that's one hand. On the other hand of the equation, we've got what an economist might call an inelastic resource. There's no more of it. It's land. So as to misquote the great Mark Twain, land, they're not making it anymore, or at least they're not making it anymore in the United Kingdom. So as ever, the question is, how can we meet this challenge as architects, as designers, as people, in a socially, environmentally, and of course, politically sustainable way? So this is broad stuff, of course. We'll get into the detail in a little bit, but systematically, I'd suggest that we can divide the responsibility for meeting the challenge into 3 main pillars. The first is the political. That is the policy making, the regulation, the planning at a national, regional, local level. In terms of overall impact, this will always be the biggest factor in delivering housing because, of course, it is a national challenge. And also because nothing that we do can ever be achievable that is not within the political and legal framework that we work within. Next up is the market, and that's the landowners, that's the clients, that's the developers, the housing associations and so on. And of course that extends to the financial structures and the financial incentives and pressures that deal with that market. And finally, on the right-hand side, we come to us, or at least us as architects, and I presume that most of you listening are architects. We are the designers. We are the ones who shape each project outcome, each individual home, whilst on this slide, the impact is going from largest global to smallest individual. Actually, I would argue that the true impact can be viewed through a different lens of the largest impacts of individual projects on individual people. They're life transforming for the people that both live within them and live next to them, near them, and use them. So that's a broad brush. We've got limited time, so I'm not going to have all the answers to all of this stuff. What I would like to show you from Jestico Whiles is a couple of vignettes of our work and thinking in 2 of these areas. So the first is the political, and we're going to discuss some government initiatives and our analysis on that. And the second is a real life example project of how we achieve density in a specific scheme. So in terms of policy, coming to that first, governments and local authorities, they always have a fine line to tread when it comes to density. We need to build more houses. It's plain and simple. Whether it goes up and down, we never actually seem to meet the targets that we set ourselves. So the targets go up every year, we never hit them. There's a clear need to deliver on that. So the government's duty and job and response is to say, all right, we need more houses. Where can we build those houses? And sort of sub-question, where can we build those houses because they're democratically elected without pissing off too many voters? That's the important bit. So when it comes to finding these answers, they introduce regulation, they introduce laws, they introduce bills. And one recent example of a bill is the 2017 Town and Country Planning Regulations Act. And that sought to streamline, simplify housing and identify areas and methods for delivery of housing. So one of their big ideas from this was, of course, well, let's take our existing buildings, our existing office buildings, and let's let the owners just, put deregulated housing within it. Don't worry about the planning system. Don't worry about minimum space standards. Don't worry about windows. Okay, right. That's one cynical way that they've managed to do it. And another initiative was Brownfield Land that they looked to address. And Brownfield land, as I'm sure many of you know, Brownfield land is a site that has previously been used or developed and is not currently fully in use. And you know, that's great. That's land that's already sitting there, just waiting to be used. It's land that's not being used at the moment. So we've got free land here. We've identified it. So the Act and regulation required local authorities to identify brownfield sites within their areas. And that's defined by the bill as at least a quarter of a hectare and land that's capable of accommodating at least 5 new homes on it. Well, that's actually a lot of land. The Brownfield Register estimates around 18,000 sites across the UK, across England in this case. That's the equivalent to 260 square kilometres, which is again equivalent to the size of Birmingham, the UK's second city, 1 million residents. So alongside that, they also introduced a thing called the permission in principle for brownfield sites. And that was a mechanism to incentivize and deliver housing on smaller sites where there may be less resources, smaller developers who don't quite have the financial might to go into the planning system. It's basically to de-risk and to streamline the delivery of these small sites. So within the Brownfield Register, any sites that are up to 1 hectare, up to 9 units of delivery, or up to 1,000 square meters of floor space would get automatic planning permission, thereby, through these Brownfield Register, permission in principle equals more homes. Great, that's a good idea, sounds good. Well, at Jestico Whiles, we recently began a research unit, and it's called Addition Labs. And the goal of the research unit is to explore and research ideas around the projects that we design. And we wanted to look at this. We wanted to see what this Brownfield Register and permission in principle would actually deliver, actually mean. So we've got some very clever people here in the office who were able to use computers to take the Excel spreadsheets that the local authorities produce and identify all of these brownfield sites, the Brownfield Register on the map. So taking London as an example, because of course we're liberal London-centric architects, we took all of the local authority data and visualized it on a map. And so this is the map as of 2019 of registered brownfield sites in London. There's about 3,000 of them. These are, by the way, just the ones that the local authorities identify, and there are various things about the processes they use to do that. We'll leave that aside for now. So we took these sites, we indexed them on a page from small to large because it looks really, really satisfying to do that. And then because the public data that's available also includes planning information, we looked into it and actually we learned that planning permission, and that doesn't even take into account the ones that aren't yet in the system but have a planning application in progress. So, okay, right, from 3,000, we're down to 999 and 991. All right, so what about the permission in principle criteria? Less than 1 hectare, less than 9 dwellings, or up to? Right, so from 3,000, we're now down to 146 sites in London, central London and Greater London. Okay, so let's take those sites, those 146 sites, and let's presume that we can achieve the maximum of 9 units through permission in principle on those sites. Well, what that gives is 1,314 homes. That's a big number. It's a good number. It's great. That's a lot more homes. But let's look at that in the context of London's 10-year housing target, which is 650,000 homes over the next 10 years. Now, within that, about a third of that is to be delivered on small sites just like the permission in principle seeks to deliver. Now let's see where the actual permission in principle falls on this graph. And I have put it in there, you might not be able to see it, it's there. So let's zoom in. It's actually 0.2% of the 10-year target. And we put the 10-year target in because we're not talking about, you know, the number of sites that become free every year. We're talking about the number of sites, the definitive number of sites, theoretically, that the local authorities have found. So, great. So what? You'll say, okay, well, you found out what's wrong with it. It doesn't seem to work. Well, the policy is bad. Sure. What are you going to do about it? Well, that's where we think the architects come in, and that's our job, because we are the ones that unlock sites. So the next step was for us to identify 3 sites representative of the smallest scale, the medium scale, and the largest scale. and see what those sites could actually deliver. So we identified those sites, and then we worked up 3 examples as if they were real build projects with 3 different typologies to respond to the context. One flatted infill site, one which was back-to-back housing, terraced housing, and then another on the larger site. We're talking almost a hectare here, so not a small site for again flatted development, but in a different format. And comparing that to what the Brownfield register, the site allocations and the permission in principle would deliver on those sites. So, right, we're starting to see that actually the permission in principle isn't really relevant, because we can already start to break that limit on any of these sites. And when we get up to the larger sizes, we're talking multiples of 5, 6, up to 10 achievable levels of density compared to what the government has allowed. So, one moment, just going to take a sip of water. What does that mean for a real world site? So the next thing I'd like to talk about is an example of a brownfield site which would have been on the register, which would have been allowable for permission in principle, and where we were able to achieve significant density increases, but in a manner which was both able to respect the scale of the context, the urban grain, the local community, and to also respect the natural environment. So this is Caledonian Road in 2014. The site is just next to Caledonian Road and Barnsbury Station. It's just off the northeastern tip of the King's Cross Master Plan by Argent, and many of our contemporary architects have worked on that. It's the site of a former light industrial unit. It is Brownfield Land. It was compulsory purchased by London Continental Railways to build the St Pancras Eurostar tunnel and link. So what you can see just where my mouse is hovering is that tunnel. They cut out and built the tunnel underneath this extent of the site and then filled over. So you can see here, that's the tunnel there. It buries into the site, and then the site was released and we worked on it. So when you talk about brownfield sites, you're often talking about highly constrained sites because of their previous use. Often we have issues like existing below ground structures, contamination in the case of industrial land, overlooking to and by neighbouring development, lack of infrastructure existing and so on. This site was no different. In fact, this was probably the most constrained site that we had ever come across. So I'll take you through a few of those. First, of course, we have the tunnel, which runs underneath the entire length of the site, the upper part of the site, at its minimum about 5 meters below the ground level. Then we're bordering the site to the north and to the west. We have the London Overground and the King's Cross Main Line, and that's producing noises of about 75 decibels, about 2 meters from the site along this northern boundary. And then the majority of the site was green from the air at least. It was railside siding site that had been left untended for about 100 years, and it had become completely overgrown naturally. So Islington, the local authority, seeing this, decided to designate the entire area of green with a blanket allocation of a strategically important nature conservation site. That's because Islington is the most densely developed local authority in the UK with the least amount of green space. So any green space that they can find, they want to keep it. By the way, this green space on the site also hides a slope of 9 meters from top to bottom. A few more things. The site access, the site was completely landlocked except for one point of access from the east, Caledonian Road. We're in a conservation area. There's a river that runs underneath this part of the site, and it's also completely covered, or was also completely covered, with Japanese knotweed. So that was great. So we have a heavily constrained site. The local authorities see this. It's both protected and infected, and we've got all kinds of existing problems with it. It's largely inaccessible. It's protected land, as I say. So they took this and they worked out a density achievable in their planning allocation of 35 dwellings per hectare. So our job is to take that and see what we can do with it. So where we see a heavily constrained site, our job is to come up with layouts, passive design solutions, technological solutions, and building technology solutions to overcome those. Where it's largely inaccessible, our job is to open it up. Open it up not just for the people that use it, but also because that green space that we identified before, that's a community resource. Islington doesn't have much of that. Next, the protected land. okay, we have to find a way to sensitively develop in and around that land, but our goal was to actually overall net increase the natural habitats and biodiversity. And that's a net increase of area, not just sort of intensifying that natural habitat. And we believed that we could achieve a much higher density with that and those solutions. So I'll talk a little bit about how we managed to achieve that, but this is of course just a microcosm of how any site can be achieved through the thinking of the architect and the consideration of each of the factors. In this case, we dealt with the railway line by building a linear building along the north and carefully aligning within that all the primary residential spaces on the south. We're very lucky with the north south facing site. And all the ancillary and circulation spaces to the north. And by so doing, we were able to create a protective bubble of land within the site into which we could then place these pavilions. These pavilions have a compact layout, they have a tight footprint, and the goal of placing these pavilions into the land and partially incurring, yes, into the protected land, is that then we can weave the green space into and around and make sure that we have little oases that are all actually connected, that then can actually bring ourselves some even more green space up to the north of the site, which was previously just tarmac. And that's how we were able to achieve an overall net increase in that green space. Secondly, by doing this, and having a scheme which is 90% dual aspect, we're actually creating and allowing every single home within this space to have a dual aspect view or a south facing view and a view which penetrates through. It brings light in from the south, but also penetrates through to the site of importance for nature conservation, to that green space, to those trees. And that's what we ended up with. In the end, there are a few more additions, like an end of terrace within the conservation area, and we terminated the street here so that we created through the linear block a very recognizable, legible urban grain. To overcome the significant constraint of the railway line below, you can see that in section there. This is actually where it's a little bit deeper, and that's the river down there as well. We worked with the client and contractor, Telford Homes, and worked with a structural lightweight steel framing system and company called Metec to deliver a solution which was as lightweight as it was possible to be. And we were able to deliver a 4 or 5 story building without impinging upon this. The fines for doing so and putting the Eurostar out of action were just astronomical. And they were fined by the minute, by the way, hundreds of £1,000s per minute. So what did that leave us with? Well, it left us with a legible site, something that it's amazing to be in, because when you walk down this street that's created, you keep on getting these glimpses that open up and reveal light coming into the south, but also reveal the green space that we've created between. So this is one of those gaps between buildings. We clad it, of course, partly in London stock brick, which is the local vernacular material for Islington, but also in this recycled fibre cement material called Ocoskin, which had its own really lovely natural tactility, but is 100% maintenance free. One of the things that we're finding in general in response to the pandemic, and of course you can't have a talk without mentioning the pandemic at the moment, one of the things we're finding is just that need for sanctuary and for green space. People are, for the most part, stuck in their homes. So clients are now very, very wary of that and alive to it, and talking about creating additional, above and beyond green space, not just what the nationally described space standards say, not just what the London Housing Design Guide used to say. And we think it's definitely our responsibility as architects, if we can't, if we have to build high density housing where people are elevated up into the air, you can't bring them to the ground necessarily, but you can bring the ground and nature up to them. So this is an example of one of our recent projects, just received planning permission in Hackney Wick, where we have allotments within the podium, within the amenity space. And how we managed to achieve that on Caledonian Road was, of course, through this opening up of the land, but also because of the way we're able to orientate and develop and manage the northern building, the linear block. We're ending up with passive solar balconies that provide shading to the extensive southern sun, but also they're sort of double what the old London Housing Design Guide standards would have been for that external space. And then the green space itself, we worked with Standardwick Land Design, who are our landscape architects, to plant it was 2,400 trees on this site. And what's going to be amazing about that is that over the next 25 years and beyond, that's going to be managed, and we will be able to revisit the site every year and just see how that forest is developing, because when this is complete, it will actually account for 10% of Islington's entire forest space. And we were also careful to open it up to the public as well. So we brought in a nature walk and a bird hide within the space. You know, once you're within that space, we were careful to frame some views so that you could be within there, within central London, in zone 1. And maybe sometimes you might not realize you're there at all. So that's one example where we were able to increase the density. And of course, that's just one example, but cumulatively, you know, every project counts, and the job of architects, the job of ourselves, and hopefully many of you watching, is to make sure that every single project counts when it comes to project and thinking, and then delivery of more homes. So thank you very much for listening. I think we'll have some questions after. I'm sure there'll be much more thinking and discussion to be had, but I'll pass back to Jonathan now.
Thank you very much, Alex. I think that's going to produce quite a few questions, but as Alex said, I'm just going to have a quick run through a bit about zinc used on residential projects. I think there's going to be a few crossover bits. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's put it in. Here we go. Hopefully you can see my screen there. As I said, Jonathan Lowy from VMZINC. I always find myself when I'm talking about zinc starting in Paris, and yet again I'm doing this. Apologies if you've seen something like this before, but zinc and Paris go together, and residential is included as well with the urban plan of sorry, it went a bit too fast, of Napoleon III and Baron Haussmann. And this was ultimately probably one of the biggest brownfield sites of the 19th century, where medieval Paris, with all its sort of squalor and disease, Napoleon III wanted to turn it into a modern city. So the tight streets, the steep roofs were going to be turned into something far more modern. And that did require an enormous project. I don't know how it would compare with a 21st century building program, but it was pretty massive. And whilst there's the grand boulevards that I'm sure all of you know, there's also a number of sort of fairly smaller buildings, courtyards, which were in the plan and still exist, and all have zinc roofs. They're all batten cap roofs with zinc, and that's one of the reasons why Paris has its sort of aspect and its sort of architectural look, because of the zinc roofs of Paris. But moving forward 150 years to actually another brownfield site, this time obviously in London. This is a site that was squashed between a park, a Battersea Power Station, 9 Elms, and a railway line. And in the middle, you can see a sort of a curved building, which was designed by Scott Brownrigg Architects, called Vista. On the right, you can see the railway line. And here, Scott Brownrigg used pigmento red, so zinc with a red pigment in the weathering to create this rain screen facade. But at quite a different scale, in Clerkenwell, a very mixed housing project, which was done for the council, Matthew Lloyd Architects created this this new project, which fits in with an Edwardian area of Clerkenwell, and you've got the ceramic bricks with at the top the anthrazinc, so the dark zinc shingles. So they're still the zinc, but it's been weathered to a dark anthra finish into shingles, and all those dormer windows and the flashings are all made from the same material. And this project, actually, I don't have a photo here, but as Alex was saying earlier, there's an internal courtyard which gives space for the 75 units for people to get out and use a communal space, which is really well used. Different country, back to Paris. Aubervilliers, which is a suburb of Paris, a fairly working class area. And this is also a mixed use building, but with quite a lot of low income housing, 61 units. And this is called the Craft Building. And the architects wanted to reflect the craft nature of the area, where there was quite a lot of small sort of craft work with a crafted facade using standing seam, which has a crafted aspect to it, and azingar, which is zinc with a texture, an actual physical texture, giving that crafted feel. And this is towards the back of the building, where actually not only standing seams being used, but other systems as well, flat lock and sine wave panels as well. But there's also an interior space again, where people can get out but be within their residence. This is completely different and a different part of the world. This is Taiwan, a Roger Sturck Harbour project that was done called One Park, 35-story twin blocks, and here the pre-weathered quartz zinc's been used as a rain screen panel. So quite different in a different part of the world. Not too far away, but in mainland China, this is Suzhou, where it's got a very traditional area where the traditional architecture still exists and is still quite strong. And here there was a real requirement not to do a 21st century design, but to keep a little bit of local context. And Shanghai Douche Architectural Design created these standing seam roofs for this residential project, again using anthrazinc. Back in Europe, this is also, there's a theme appearing here, another brownfield site, where Star & Partners connected two neighborhoods of the port of Wismar using this new development. It's now become a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and this area is housing, but it's also shops and bars. And I think from a materiality aspect, I think the quartz zinc here really works well with the brickwork. They really go together in a harmonious way. A bit further north into Sweden, a residential block where the architects have used, this is actually in Gothenburg, where the architects have used different finishes, but on the walls, it's all sine wave corrugated panels, either in quartz, which is on the left, the middle grey, or anthrazinc, which you can see on the bottom right in the front corner, and on the right, on the top photo in the middle, you can see the red, pigmento red. Then there's the sort of Bauhaus type balconies, which again give residences access to the outside. Obviously, the climate of Gothenburg requires different things to maybe different parts of the world. Zinc's used not only for flats, apartment blocks, but also for quite a lot of small private residential projects, whether it be extensions, whether it be private houses. And here's a range of projects across North America, the US and Canada in particular. On the left is a townhouse or quite a townhouse, but a house on a fairly small plot in Toronto. And on the top right is a building in New Orleans, of all places. So a wide range. The bottom middle is also Toronto, and on the right is a building in a house in Arizona in the desert. And in Australia, same thing. Zinc's used on private houses. on various size plots, some larger than others, using different finishes of zinc, so the anthrazinc, the pigmento, different aspects, and even used to clad an aquarium that you can see in the bottom right, which I think there's only one of those that I know of in the world. Slightly closer to home, as I said earlier, zinc is used for cladding extensions, and this is one that I think is particularly attractive. It's a project in Holland by Studio Mark, where they took an older building with a thatch roof and added a pigmento red clad building and connected it with a very attractive glazed connection box, which I think really, really works well. Back to the UK, both these projects use zinc on the roofs and walls. Both of them use standing seam, but I suppose the similarities stop there. On the left, you've got the anthrazinc. This is a project in a private house in the Lake District, and the bottom right is using actually natural zinc, which will slowly form its patina on the coast in Kent. So same material, same technique, but quite different style houses. And again, talking about different uses or different styles, this is a project in Spain, in northern Spain, where the architects have sort of, I don't think it's insulting to say it has a Lego feel to it, blocks put together using pigmento green flat lock panels as the skin of the building. And then back to the UK, the northeast this time. This is a project by Simpsonhoff in North Shields, where it's an industrial site, and you can see on the right hand photo at the back there's an old warehouse, the Brewery Bond warehouse, obviously a brick building, and there was inspiration taken from that sort of almost texture and obviously form to create these residential blocks by the right on the Tyne. You can, on the left, you can just about see the river. Here in this East London project, GPAD Architects extended upwards an old Art Deco building to create some flats, and they clad it with anthrazinc, sine wave, and not only did they curve the panels, but they also perforated them. And I did, a few years ago, an architect did ask me about whether we could produce transparent zinc, which I sort of turned my nose up, said you can't do that. Well, you can see on the right, you can absolutely have transparent zinc. So it's the perforated curved anthrazinc and the non-curved are quite effective in this building. And sort of getting towards the end, this is a building that Alex probably knows, Greenwich Millennium Village by Jestico Whiles, which is a project that consists of townhouses and flats. And again, talking about the sort of the traditional street or small scale courtyard, that's been included in this project as well, as you can see in the bottom middle. And obviously it incorporates a number of finishes of zinc and systems as well. So before we get to the Q&A, we've sort of gone around the world looking at residential projects clad in zinc. Obviously, there's lots of different buildings that you can clad with zinc. So if you do need more information, samples, a CPD, details, a list of contractors, please don't hesitate to contact us. It is important to use a qualified contractor. The design's got to be right. The material zinc lasts for 100 years or more, but it does need to be installed correctly. So we do have VMZINC at work partners that can do that. So let's, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to open up the Q&A box and see what we have. So I've got, I think this is for you, Alex.
Okay.
Matthew Margate says, have you looked at the 3 sites purely speculatively or with a client?
Yeah, so that I think that's referring to the 3 sites that we analysed as part of the Brownfield research, the small, medium, and large. And the answer, Matthew, is no. This was a piece of independent research. We felt in starting Addition Labs, the research unit within our practice, that it's very important that that is an individual ecosystem that can plug into various different projects. But the goal is to create independent thinking. And so it was a purely thought exercise and design exercise from our point of view. So hopefully that answers your question. Of course, it does then have knock-on effects and things that we discover through doing that research, and that is the goal, then bring value to the practice through published research and influencing our projects in future.
Okay, excellent. Another question for you, Alex. This is lightweight structure plus minimum foundations plus thousands of new trees equal low embodied carbon. Was this a target for the development? I'm guessing it probably was in some shape or form.
It was. We had a really fantastic, willing and enthusiastic client in Telford Homes. And one of the directors there, we worked with Telford Homes since their inception, really, I think for 25 years now. And that they're great because they're not just the client developer, they're the contractor as well. So when you work with them, you know that what you're designing is what you're going to get. So there's not that divorce between the design stage and the development stage. So they commit to doing exactly what they say they're going to do. And I think it's fair to say that all of the stars aligned on this project because we were on such a constrained site and had that designation of site importance for nature conservation. We were thereby bound to create an environmentally sustainable scheme, because of course without doing that we wouldn't have achieved planning permission, we wouldn't have even been able to develop the site at all. So that's maybe a cynical way of looking at it, but actually the enthusiasm on the client side, the desire to achieve one of those objectives, we targeted what used to be the Code for Sustainable Homes Level 5 within the scheme, with elements like rainwater harvesting and things like that, which were all implemented, blue roof solutions and all of that. And you know, to be honest, it's also helped by the fact that it's a central London location with high value deliverables. So I think that, as I say, the stars aligned, and our goals as always to be a sustainable practice aligned really well with the client, aligned really well with the site, and aligned really well with the local authority.
I think the idea of the Islington Forest is really nice as well. I'd never sort of really thought about a forest in Islington, but that's nice. I think Dom Cox has got some questions about zinc, so I'm going to try and answer all of them if I can. The first one is toxicity of rainwater runoff. Can zinc rainwater be potable? So can you so zinc is not a toxic metal as lead or cadmium or arsenic. We require, all living organisms require zinc. Too much of anything is always a good thing. If you drank water from a sort of a water butt coming directly from a zinc roof, you're probably unlikely to do yourself any harm. There might be some bugs that might be floating around in the gutter, but it's probably not going to be the zinc that's going to be a problem. It certainly is absolutely fine for watering your garden. It's a possibility it could even be beneficial for some plants, but that's not a problem at all. The next question Dom asks is, what about the zinc on the Daniel Liebskin use in Holloway Road? I believe that's stainless steel. I don't think that's zinc. I've been past it. I don't know the project in detail, but I think it's stainless steel. Zinc, even if you use natural zinc, it won't stay shiny. It forms a patina, and will always go to sort of a warmer, matter look, as opposed to sort of the sharpness of stainless steel, which sometimes might be something that's requested. Which countries is zinc extracted from? It's a fairly common ore. So there's if you dig down, probably, I'm not sure where you are, Dom, but there will be some zinc in some form under pretty much any building or field anywhere in the world. But Peru, Canada, and North Africa are the places where there's quite a lot of zinc. There's a zinc mine in Sweden, and there was one in Ireland. So it's sort of from South America and Canada are probably the biggest sources. Obviously, some of the zinc that's used is recycled, and all zinc can be recycled. Here's one for you, Alex. Has Alex also looked at greenfield sites in the same way? There are arguments that brownfield sites are currently more biodiverse than, say, extensively farming land or golf courses. So is it worth looking at greenfield sites? Basically, that's Marcel Ridyard who asks that.
Well, everything helps. We need to build more. That's just a fact of where we are. Greenfield is much more controversial than brownfield. Brownfield being sites that have already been previously developed. Greenfield is what you might call virgin land. And of course, as you'll know, with successive governments, even ever more hammering down on the idea of expansion into the green belt of London, or green and farming land across the country. It's quite controversial. And I will say that we haven't looked at it, although we have looked at residential developments outside of London in sites that you might consider greenfield that have then been allocated as land for development. I think there's a lot more to be looked at, and thanks. I think maybe we'll take that on and do a bit more research in that. So thank you.
Nick Hayden asks, this is very relevant, with density trends jumping, how can architects, developers ensure development still create places which promote well-being for residents? Well, I think you've probably shown some of that, but maybe you might want to say something else, Alex.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Nick. Big question. Thanks for that. Well, how do we ensure developments still create spaces which promote well-being for residents? Well, every project is individual, and you have to approach each housing project. I think this is something that seems like a trite thing to say, but it's really important that when you're an architect designing a scheme of whether it's one home or whether it's 100 homes or whether it's a master plan of 1,000 homes, when you get into the detail, you have to treat and design every home like it's your own home or like it could be your own home. And it's only by viewing that through that lens that you're going to be able to create homes which promote well-being. The other things that I did mention in the talk, which I think are ever more relevant, is green space, private amenity space and shared amenity space. That's essential for personal growth and also community growth. We get a lot of talk about greenwashing and things like that, but genuinely, I think we need to bring the ground up to height when we have buildings that are dense and tall. One of my absolute favorite buildings is the Bosco Verticale in Milan. And although some architects sniff at it a little bit, I guarantee that when you go and look at that building, everyone around you will be taking photos and just amazed and excited. And they turn to you and say, why don't all buildings look like this? And I think, there's a lot in that. People like to see things like that.
Okay, here's a question for me. How do you mitigate the sound of rainwater on metal? Obviously, there's different types of metal, and zinc has the advantage of being relatively soft, not as soft as lead, and impact noise is not a major problem. Zinc is also installed on a continuous support as far as the roof concerned. So the zinc is fairly soft and it's a continuous support. It's nothing like going down to B&Q or Wickes on a Sunday afternoon to buy some screws and there's a cloud burst and you sort of feel like you're inside a drum. That really isn't a problem with a zinc roof due to the nature of the actual metal and the nature of the installation. So sound from impact noise from rain, even from hail, is not a problem. As you probably saw at the beginning of the presentation, there's an awful lot of the rooftops of Paris have zinc on them, and an awful lot of the attic spaces are actually living accommodation, and often actually not very well insulated. And impact noise is not really a problem. Warren Williams, I think this is a question for you, Alex. This is about, this is an excellent presentation. Due to the pandemic and importance of social distancing, do you believe that space standards will increase? Communal circulation areas, and will this sort of affect the density of housing schemes in terms of legislation? Is that going to happen, or is it going to be not going to happen?
Well, there's two things. Thank you, Warren, for the question. There's two things to that. The first is, what is legislation going to drive, and the second is, what's the market going to drive? And you're right, that will be a slow change because buildings take a long time to conceive, design, develop, and build and complete. So, yeah, the pandemic is an interesting one, and obviously you have to touch on it. There's a sort of debunked theory in historical analysis of the great man theory that one individual man and event will change a trend. I think that the pandemic, whilst having clear and massive current impact, this is my belief, it won't stop the overall global trends. And at the end of the day, the market will decide whether housing should have larger communal spaces and all of that. And we have to recognize as well that building anything, especially housing, is a commercial venture. At least now that the councils don't build too much housing anymore. Hopefully they'll start doing more of that. And building a communal space is a cost. So there's a delicate balance that's going to have to happen. And as I say, if you want to look at the history of legislation and space standards, there's excellent work out there by Julia Park of Levitt Bernstein Architects, detailing how that's changed over the years. I don't think, at least with the current political situation, we'll start to see ever more increasing space standards because our government, at least at the moment, is very much a free market government.
Okay. This is, I'm not sure what you're going to be able to give on this, but Chris Whiteman says a really beautiful scheme, but he's wondering sort of about the cost.
Yeah.
Can you? I know sometimes that's a difficult thing to.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Chris. So we provided 35% affordable housing on the Caledonian Road scheme, which was 59 units out of 156, and those were the larger units. And they were, I think that they are given at London affordable rent, or don't quote me on that. And what was really interesting in the way that the scheme actually ended up being laid out was the linear building, the one that I described along the north of the site, was actually the part of the scheme which had all the affordable housing in it. And because of the way we had to lay out the scheme, and without going into too much detail, the wheelchair, using the lightweight steel frame, we had to stack all the units perfectly, but put the wheelchair accessible units on the ground floor, which meant that all the flats above were regular homes, but the size of wheelchair accessible homes, which actually meant that the affordable homes ended up being something like 30% above the minimum space standards in the case of the non-accessible ones. And we visited those homes, and we've spoken to the people within them, and they say they love living in there, particularly the affordable homes. So we're very pleased with that. So yes, obviously there's wider ecosystems and discussion to have about the affordability of housing. We are a service industry, so
yeah. I think it's always difficult. Affordable housing. What's affordable? You know, it's a difficult subject. Probably needs a lot more discussion. Back to something that's a little bit precise and technical on this. We mentioned about the zinc roof and the acoustics of that, but what about the lightweight steel frame system? Did that have any acoustic create issues or problems, or was that?
Well, surprisingly not. We were concerned about this from the beginning, and we had an acoustic consultant, Cass Allen, who did a number of studies on this. We thought that maybe it would be less resistant to impact-borne noise because of the steel frame. It's sonorous. It can vibrate more easily than mass concrete. And we're also concerned about the airborne noise from the north. But they did studies, and we carefully detailed the building to minimize this transfer of noise. And luckily, we've been inside the buildings and we've spoken to residents, and they don't seem to be impacted by either the noise of the tunnel below, because that has very, very deep ground and low frequency vibrations, or the high-pitched squeaking of the railway noise to the north. So,
okay.
Thankfully not.
No, good, excellent. Just on that same subject, how does the lightweight structure compare in terms of costs and durability?
It compared favourably because it's prefabricated entirely off-site. That meant that the construction time was vastly reduced. We did explore cross-laminated timber at the time, and unfortunately, although it was something we really were interested in considering, and we do build with cross-laminated timber on a number of our schools projects, it wasn't something that was viable in this particular instance. So the alternative sought out at the time was this lightweight steel frame, and they were pretty much cost neutral with each other. And then also, to be clear, we could not have built with any other heavier, massive system above the tunnel. So it was the right choice.
Okay, I think we've got about another couple of minutes, so just try and get to another couple of questions. Stephen Porter is asking about what other alternatives to passive house you could consider if you're wanting to go beyond the building regulations. So if you actually want to go further, what can you do? Are there any specific alternatives? That's a pretty tricky question to end on, maybe, but
yes. Well, passive house is a rationale and a method and a system, but like any system, it incorporates lots of things from different areas, which you don't necessarily have to adhere to the whole thing to achieve good design. So passive house has really, really good principles of passive layouts, passive solar design and things like that, which you can always push for in your design in terms of orientation and shading and things like that, without necessarily having to go the full gamut of all the passive house solutions. In reality, we are often led by the current legislation in terms of Part L and so on. And when we're asked to go above and beyond, we're always, of course, happy to do that. So, you know, there's always a different individual outcome and method for every project.
Right, I think there are quite a few more questions in the question box, but I don't think we're going to be able to get to any more, unfortunately. But I think we'll probably have access to your questions, so we might get back to you afterwards. I know it's not quite as good as doing it now, but unfortunately we're coming to the end of our hour, which has flown by. So thanks to AJ 100 Festival for putting this week on, and thank you, Alex, very much for talking about a very interesting subject, showing a very interesting project. It was really fascinating. So thanks, Alex Luria from Jestico Whiles. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Obviously, if you do want any more information on any of these subjects, and certainly the zinc, please don't hesitate to contact us. So thank you very much, and see you very soon. Thanks, Alex. Goodbye.